we can move on to a second one, which I think is even a bigger problem in today's world.
Yeah.
We're talking about mindful eating, right? So
Yeah.
a lot of people, including myself, we have our smartphone right next to our meal. We have our phone somewhere in arm's reach. It's really rare to find someone in today's world that has their phone further away from them. Or at least we have our laptops. We have watched YouTube while we're consuming food. Right? A lot of people that actually, when I posted this video about mindful eating, they told me, "Oh, I don't longer watch the videos because I used to watch them when I was eating food." And there's actually a really cool review paper from 2012 that I think it's American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, where they looked at what happens when people watch TV, because they use TV as a measurement, which is more common in general population. What happens when you do watch TV and eat food? Well, number one, you eat more food, which is kind of obvious, right? You're going to eat more because you're distracted. You don't know what's going on because you eat faster, and you just don't know what's going on there. But the second finding was even more interesting, is that people felt hungrier faster. that is the, like, it's incredible. Like, when we're mindful, we eat less afterwards. It's as if we don't remember how much we ate if we're distracted, which kind of skews our perception of how much we need to eat for the rest of the day. And that is even more fascinating than actually being distracted in that single meal, right? Because that single meal, I mean, doesn't matter as much. But if you just go through it and you just wolf through the meal in 2 minutes, which is something I've done a billion times, especially on a diet, I at least anecdotally from my own perception, at least looking at this review, there seems to be an effect on consecutive meals throughout the day where people would compensate, would eat more because they don't even remember what's going on. Right? And this mindfulness is an incredible topic that we can dive into. It's a whole webinar on that if you want to do that. But how mindfulness affects what we're actually doing in today's world. And literally, I mean, most people don't even know how their food tastes and smells. Like, ask people. I mean, they just go through the meal like, bam, you know, they don't even know what's going on. And that's a huge thing. I mean, we're going back at like that. We want the hedonistic value, but we don't even go for it. Right? We don't even enjoy the meal, but we want it. We want it in our minds, but when we're given the situation, we literally don't do that. So some things that you can actually do to combat this and to slow it down, as you know, that even the response that you get from your gut to your brain takes a while to reach. So if you're on a diet, for example, if you're eating a smaller meal, it might make sense to actually wait for that, to eat slower, to actually get those signals to fully, I mean, it's very individual. Some people will get there faster than others. Some take like 20 minutes for the gut signal to actually reach the brain. So as you're eating slower, there are certain things you can do. Is, let's say you eat with your non-dominant hand. If you're right-handed, you eat with your left hand, which automatically slows you down. You can count your bites, like how many bites you had. You can use smaller forks, spoons. You can actually like just not put your phone nearby and eat somewhere in an environment where there's just food and your thoughts. Yeah, literally, you can just pay attention to the food and use it as meditation, which is something that I do. Right, every meal is like my little meditation session. It's kind of crazy, but and I know it's a little bit off, but I like to practice my focus. Right, I'm training my focus, and I figured if I eat at the same time and watch my phone and my laptop and all these things, I'm training my brain to be like that in other situations. So it's not just about that meal, but you're literally training a pattern, a behavior that is going to be repeated afterwards when you want to focus. So you want to take every chance that you have throughout the day to practice your focus. And that's going to translate to your productivity, to general happiness, which is linked to productivity in a way. And overall, it's going to make you a happier person, right? Because you're not going to be rushing all the time. And that's a huge issue.
Right. And it's crazy because there's so much, there are so many things that improve if you become more mindful. Like this being distracted all the time and so fragmented, it just impacts so many things. And I've definitely noticed that before, even during a bulk, when I'm eating a lot of food, but I'm playing around with YouTube and whatever, like at the end of the meal, I'm like, did this meal even happen? Like I feel my stomach being stretched, but I didn't even enjoy this. It's crazy. Now, what did you find? What did you find though with, for example, just listening to something and not being looking away, just looking at your food?
Here's the thing, right? Multitasking is a myth, right? It is a
Yeah.
myth, but it is also possible in a way to do it in a more clever way, right? So there's multitasking things that you literally can't do at the same time. So me and you, at the time of this conversation, for example, we couldn't be writing an article at the same time as doing this. There's
Yeah.
no way our brains would have that amount of energy and focus to be able to do this at the same time. I found that listening to like let's say music is possible and doing that, but listening to an actual podcast and educating yourself where you actually need to think about the information, how you would apply the information, how would you teach the information to someone else, that's a trick how you can use to retain information better. It's still not possible to actually feel the meal, but you can slow it down. So in a way, listening to a podcast and thinking about the podcast, you can actually eat slower. So there's some benefit. I mean, it's not that bad, but again, I would say that literally take that 10 minutes off the podcast. No, not a big deal. While you're cooking, you can listen to a podcast, but while you're eating, it's probably a better idea if you're on a diet to just focus on the meal and try to get as much of meal out of that taste out of it as possible. And then resume your podcast. You know, it is something I'm guilty of as well. I know that we crave for knowledge, but think about it really. How much of that knowledge do you really retain when you're trying to do all these things at once? And while you're cooking, because it's an automated behavior, you probably cook a billion times. While you're cleaning your house, you can listen to a podcast. While you're walking your dog, you can do that. Automated behaviors that don't require any attention, you can definitely multitask multiple things. I mean, easily. But in a behavior that actually requires attention in two ways, it's extremely hard. It's very, very difficult, right? Because your cognitive ability to basically be in flow for two things at once is impossible, right? Like you can't, right? You just
and also I guess if you're having like YouTube and podcast and this and that, then you're kind of training yourself to perceive that meal as this hugely rewarding, big celebratory whatever, and that again trains you into like being kind of food obsessed, which when you're dieting, that's kind of an issue to begin with. So
yeah, you're kind of conditioning yourself. Again, you're conditioning yourself. You always want to look at that everything you're doing, you're conditioning yourself for a behavior that is, if you repeat it enough, you actually turn that behavior into a habit. So how effective that is, and that's something that we can go into a little bit later. How can you condition yourself out of certain things that are potentially harming you, which is definitely browsing through Facebook newsfeed and eating food at the same time. I mean, that's something that, and Instagram and Snap and all these other sources, right?
Yeah,
so
definitely.
yeah.